Hello, and welcome back to another episode recap. In these recaps, I'll lay out 5 things that I learned from my conversation with a historical expert. And today, we'll chat about the 1993 film Tombstone and one of the most famous gunfights in the Old West, the gunfight at the OK Corral. If you're a regular listener to the audio version of the Based on a True Story podcast, you'll know that I had the producer and host of the Legends of the Old West podcast, Chris Wimmer, on the show to talk about the historical accuracy of the movie Tombstone. Well, that episode was over an hour long, so if you don't have time to listen to the whole thing yet, then here's a quick video to relay the 5 key things that I learned from my discussion with Chris. Let's get started. Number 1, the gunfight at the OK Corral was not at the OK Corral. Even though we're all familiar with the term, the gunfight at the OK Corral, the actual gunfight itself took place at a vacant lot that backed up against the OK Corral. So it wasn't actually at the OK Corral itself. But I guess the name the gunfight at the vacant lot that backs up against the OK Corral just doesn't have the same ring to it. Number 2. The gunfight at the OK Corral misnomer came about in the 1930s. Even though the gunfight wasn't at the OK Corral, today we're well aware of that phrase. So when did that come about? Well, that was coined at some time in the 1930s by an author who was writing about the fight. That means at the time of the gunfight itself, it wasn't called the gunfight at the OK Corral. As we learned earlier, it didn't happen at the OK Corral, but a vacant lot behind it. So one of the most common names for the event at the time was the fight on Fremont Street, because that's the street the vacant lot opened up to. Number 3, the vacant lot was small. When Chris described the size of the vacant lot, it really helped solidify in my mind what this gunfight might have been like. The example Chris used was a 2-car garage. That's about 18 feet or about 5.4 meters wide. Now, remember, the gunfight itself lasted only 27 seconds, but in that time, we had 7 guys shooting about 30 times at each other in this small lot. Can you imagine what that must have been like? No wonder we're still talking about this gunfight today. Number 4. One of the Earps wasn't even hit. Even in that tight space with so many bullets flying around in a short period of time, Wyatt Earp was not hit. We can't say the same for his brothers, though. Morgan Earp was hit by a bullet that entered his right shoulder, traveled along his back, and exited his left shoulder. Virgil Earp was shot in the leg, like we see in the movie, and initially they thought Doc Holliday was hit pretty seriously too, but once the chaos slowed down, they realized his injury turned out to be more of a bullet grazing him. As for the Cowboys, they weren't so fortunate. 3 of the Cowboys were killed, with 2 of them dying a few hours after the gunfight from their injuries. Number 5. There was another Earp brother not in the movie. We know about Morgan, Virgil, and Wyatt Earp in the movie, but there was another one, Jim. He was another brother who wasn't even in the movie at all. He was a bartender in Tombstone during the events that we saw in the movie, though, although he was not involved in the gunfight itself, so perhaps that's why the filmmakers left him out. That's all for today, but as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Chris and I chatted for almost an hour about the historical accuracy of Tombstone. So we talked about a lot more than just the things that we talked about here today, but hopefully you enjoyed this recap of 5 things that I learned from Chris Wimmer about the movie Tombstone. If you want to hear Chris's more detailed explanations about the facts we've talked about in this video and way more, go check out the full audio podcast episode at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/142. Once again, that's basedonatruestorypodcast.com/142. And don't forget, Chris has a great podcast called Legends of the Old West to learn about even more detail about the story of Tombstone and, well, other legends of the Old West. So go subscribe to that. And speaking of subscribing, for more recaps and full-length episodes of Based on a True Story, hit that subscribe button right now. Thanks for watching.